Hey everybody, my name is Nate Swick, and I am joined, hello, once again by Greg Neese, the webmaster here at the ABA. And if you were with us early on when we had a bunch of technical difficulties, I want to thank you for bearing with us while we figured those out. And my phone is talking to me, and I need it to shut up. Uh, so welcome. Hey everybody, try my name figure is this Nate out Swick, as we and I am joined. Hello, once again. So if you have any questions about bird ID, please leave them in the comments, tweet at us, or leave them in the comments on YouTube. We will try and get to them. Greg, how's your self-isolation going?
Hey, I'm thoroughly isolated here.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
even threw the dog outside.
Yeah. No, nothing. It's. I don't know that
I'm,
COVID is transmitted through dogs, but you can never be too careful these days.
yeah, well, I don't know, I was going to make some joke, but I'm still setting my screen up here.
Yeah, right. We'll get there. We'll get there. So we do these frequently on What's This Bird on the on ABA's Facebook group. What's This Bird? Or if you're not familiar with it, that people come on in. They shower images of birds that they have taken, and we basically crowdsource the identification. It's also a nice little tool for us to kind of learn how to identify birds together as a group. We've certainly heard a lot from people who enjoy it that way. And so what we have here is an opportunity for folks to ask us any questions that they have about bird identification or birds in general. You know, we'll try our best to answer any questions. But we do have a few images that I've taken from What's This Bird recently, and we can run through those and kind of talk about how we get those identifications. But hello to everybody out there. We have quite a few people following us on various channels. If you're there, please let us know. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments, and we will get to them. Greg,
Hello.
what's happening these days with birds in Chicago? Around here, it's starting to really warm up, and everything is singing a lot.
Everything's singing. Sandhill cranes are moving.
Oh, nice.
It seems like every time there's even a hint of a south wind, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of cranes in the air.
Yeah.
Um,
Over the city of Chicago.
yeah, I mean
right over
Oh,
Chicago.
yeah, yeah, if you draw a kind of a straight, yeah, cranes don't mess around. They
Yeah.
just go. They don't care about water or anything else. They just go in
Mhm.
straight lines. And if you draw a straight line from Jasper Pulaski in Indiana, or where they're coming from in Tennessee, just straight up into Wisconsin, and those are some of those birds are going all the way to Siberia. You just draw
Yeah.
a straight line, and it goes right over the city of Chicago. And so yeah, and especially the kind of west side where I'm at, along the Des Plaines River, we get thousands and thousands, and we get whooping cranes, which is fun.
Yeah.
I have.
Unfortunately, around where I am, we're not like I'm in the western Piedmont of North Carolina. We don't really have any major. We're kind of in the middle of the two major flyways. You know, a lot of birds go up the East Coast, and a lot of birds kind of follow the Appalachians. And right here in the middle, we don't get a ton. But there's been a ton of crows moving. I've noticed lots of crows and flocks and jays kind of moving, shuttling from place to place, which always seems to be a sign of early spring for me around here. And the house finches are trying to build their nests underneath my eaves on my front porch as well.
Yeah, I mean, except for robins, the real early March stuff has arrived, but nothing. We haven't had a big push yet, other than cranes.
Yeah, yeah. So Wade Baker, excuse me, asked us a question on Facebook. Warbler spotting recommendations. I mean, we could take that two ways, like suggestions for how to spot warblers, or even places to go see warblers. I'm not exactly sure where you're aiming at, Wade, but we can give you both. Why not? So, what are some great places to see warblers around where you are? The
I
Great
think,
Lakes are great for that.
that is one thing. It's the Great Lakes is kind of the epicenter of warbler migration in
Yeah.
North America, and uh, really, it's in for spring migration. It's all about flowering trees,
Yeah.
and especially things like flowering crab apples. If you hit it just right, where you've got good numbers of flowering trees during that period of May, or April, wherever you are along the migratory path, and the trees are blossoming. The warblers really depend heavily on pollen, but also the insects that are attracted to
Exactly.
the flowers. And every once in a while, Montrose Point hits it just right where the trees are all in bloom, and the crab apples are they're relatively short, and you get just dozens, if not hundreds,
Yeah.
of warblers in breeding plumage almost at eye level.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite place, at least in the southeast, to go look for warblers is the Blue Ridge Parkway. And Wade Baker asked how to attract fine warblers in West Tennessee. Well, the Appalachians. A lot of birds are using the Appalachians as kind of the, you know, to kind of reorient themselves, especially when the sun. So birds migrate at night. When the sun comes up, they can see what's below them, and they can kind of reorient themselves and get kind of where they want to be. And the Appalachians are one of those great, geographical landmarks that get birds lined up where they're supposed to be. And the Blue Ridge Parkway, in particular, if you can get on it, it runs in western North Carolina and western Virginia. There are all these really wonderful overlooks where you can pretty much like see directly into the canopies of the trees, so you can get kind of unusual birds that you can get like eye level looks at things that are usually like super high up, things like blackburnian warblers and yellow-throated warblers and even cerulean warblers in some places. So that's one of my favorite places. Those kind of mountain roads in eastern Tennessee, not necessarily western Tennessee, but they're great places to get good looks at birds at in ways that you might not otherwise. West Tennessee, any parks along the Mississippi, as John says, are going to be good. Just like the Appalachian Mountains, the Mississippi is sort of one of those landmarks that gets people, that gets birds oriented, and they're going to kind of go up the Mississippi. I know some great places in St. Louis, a little bit further north, where there's some city parks that are kind of close to the Mississippi that get a ton of really great, a lot of warblers this time of year, or another 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, and one other thing is, and especially on high ceiling days, dry days, splashy, shallow water,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
if there isn't droplets on the leaves in the morning that they can just drink by licking it off the leaves or drinking it off the leaves, they will come down. I mean, even the blackburnians and things like that live way up high will come down to the ground to drink.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and not all birds, not all warblers are going to be really high up. You want to make sure that you're paying attention to kind of the brushy stuff too, for things like common yellow throats and American redstarts and whatnot. Redstarts can be all over the place, but
Yeah.
any kind of brushy, flowering, brambly sort of place is going to be good for a lot of kind of low warblers. Yeah, but I mean, it's end of March. Around here, the Louisiana water thrushes have been on territory and singing for about 3, 4 weeks now. So, I mean, they're already here. If you can get out and see them in a socially isolated, responsible way, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I've got some photos. Let's throw them up on there, Greg. What do you say? These are some pictures
Go
that
ahead.
people have suggested, have put on What's This Bird, the Facebook group What's This Bird, in the last, like the last 2 days, that have kind of been, good indicators of the kind of things that you can expect to see outside these days, or just kind of fun pictures that are kind of difficult. So I'm going to throw one of those difficult ones up for you. Greg, what do you think of this weird heron? We were talking about this before we went live, and we both sort of went
Yeah.
back and forth on this bird.
Well, it's hard to tell whether the legs are actually green or gray. The bird's kind of leggy. It's but it still seems kind of squat, but it's hard. I mean, it's a kind of an interesting, confusing bird. After looking at it for a little bit, I'm kind of leaning little blue heron.
Yeah.
And the reasons for that for me are, well, the bicolored bill for one,
Mm-hmm.
but the bicolored bill in conjunction with the pale lores, uh, and the overall white. It's the plumage is white.
Yeah.
There's no splotchiness coming in, and but you can just see the gray primary tips,
Oh, yeah. That's a
which
good thing.
is
That reddish egret obviously is the other bird that you could
right.
find. They're fairly common at Merritt Island, Florida, which is on the Atlantic coast of Florida, about 2/3 of the way up the peninsula. Yeah, I mean, Merritt Island is one of the great places in the continent to see reddish egret. And when I first saw this bird, that was the first thing I thought. It was like, oh, that looks kind of like a reddish egret. But yeah, as you mentioned, I got convinced that it was a little blue heron. The legs seem awfully kind of short, too. Reddish egret is super lanky, long-legged,
Yeah.
long-necked, although you can't really see the neck in this bird very well. But yeah, as you say, those dusky wingtips, which are not obvious until you really start looking at this bird. That's one of the things that you're gonna. That's a classic little blue heron field mark, especially young little blue herons.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when they're flying overhead, those dusky primary
yeah,
tips are
you see them really well.
diagnostic.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's go another one. Here's another kind of tough one, Greg. This one is a shorebird, early spring. Great time for shorebirds to start moving northward. This is from Nueces County, Texas. I never know whether I'm pronouncing Nueces right. It's along the upper Texas coast. And this is
It's well, it's Texas. It's Texas, so it's going to be pronounced Nutches.
Nutches. Yeah.
Um, I don't know.
Yeah. So
um,
what? Let's first thing you want to do with shorebirds is kind of narrow them down to genus or just type. So this is a large-bodied, kind of fat-bodied shorebird. You can't see the bill. There were some other photos. I didn't throw them on there. Maybe I should have. That show the bill. It's got a very long bill. So we know that this is one of our dowitchers, of which we have two, short-billed
yeah.
and long-billed dowitcher. And Greg, how do you tell the dowitchers apart?
Next, okay, so
I always
seriously,
forget. I always forget.
let's go to the warblers. uh, yeah, photos of dowitchers, it's tough, and I'm having an old man moment and can't exactly remember in this plumage the barring on the flanks, if that's even relevant in this plumage.
I think it is. I mean, it's certainly something to think of. And I'm pulling out my trusty Sibley app here on my phone because that's where I always go to. I should just put the dowitchers up because it feels like
I will
I
will say this, that this bird is like right in the middle between flatback and humpback, but it looks kind of humpbacked. So
yeah,
if
so
this bird,
that's another one of the classic field marks that people talk about
yeah.
sometimes. Is, long-billed dowitcher looks like it swallowed a grapefruit. It's kind of fat and humpbacked, whereas short-billed is a little flatter. Hard to
And
tell.
this is a good example of where a still photograph is harder to identify than the bird moving around in front of you, because as they move around, you can really see, that the long bills tend to be puffy, humpback, whereas the short bills are flatback.
They're going to give you some humpback looks at some point if you watch them for long enough, or even short enough. It only takes about 20 seconds to move so fast.
But I think if I had to call this, I'd call it long billed.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. It is Nueces, Neches, whatever county, Texas, and I always think of long-billed as very much a central flyway bird. They're less common on the coast, although you do get them from time to time. And I would probably call this long-billed as well. Yeah, John Lowry, our colleague at the ABA, pops in. He says, in many places, timing is a good clue. He's absolutely right. It'd be nice to have some local Texas knowledge. Status and distribution, S&D, the other softer field marks, the field marks that aren't even on the bird, where and when a bird shows up at a given time are such great clues. If you know when the long bills are supposed to come, and you pop up eBird to figure that out, versus the short bills, birds tend to keep to their schedules, so they're going to come when you expect them. And if you don't have any real particular reason to choose, say otherwise, then you go with the more common one. Think when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, as they say. Should we go to the next one?
Cool.
All
sure.
Right. Here's another one that birders in the south, especially the southeast, are going to be seeing a lot of in the next few weeks, and probably have all summer. It's one of the very early warblers. Let's talk warblers. This one was taken in Charleston, South Carolina, March 16th, so only a few days ago, right on time for this species of warbler. And Greg, you want to say what you're looking for on this one?
Well, the chestnut cap and the supercilium, the eyebrow, are right away palm warbler.
Yep.
This bird's coming into breeding plumage, um, and so you see a little bit of the chestnut cap there.
Yeah.
But for palm warblers in all plumages, the thing that really catches my attention first is that it looks like the butt is dipped in green juice.
Oh, all
It just the rump and the undertail coverts. It's got that yellow green look to it, and when they're flying away from you, you see that yellow green. You can see it on this here.
Yeah, and behavior is obviously the one of the best ways to identify a palm warbler, which you can't see in a still photo. But I'm sure that this observer, who I don't recall the name offhand, they almost certainly saw a yellowish warbler walking around along the ground. They usually don't get super high, although when they sing, they can get up there. But it's bobbing its tail. It bobs its tail constantly. That's what palm warblers do. They're one of the colloquial names is wagtail warbler for good reason. You see, there are other warblers that will wag their tails from time to time. I'm thinking of prairie especially, but none of them do it as often and as enthusiastically as a palm warbler. So if you're seeing a warbler walking around on the ground, bobbing its tail, almost certainly palm warbler. And in Florida in the winter, like they're lawn birds, like American robins and stuff. Like they walk around in manicured lawns. It's nuts.
Yeah.
All right, let me throw the next one at you. Oh,
but
first, Tristan Jobin has a question on Facebook. He says, Southern Quebec, now birding is mostly scoping through hundreds of thousands of geese and ducks that are more or less distant. Yeah, that is classic winter birding across a lot of the continent. How do you attract new birders to the hobby without boring them or forcing them to buy a scope? Wow, that is a good question. Let them use your scope, although I wouldn't encourage that now. Yeah, I mean, I think you got to focus on the close stuff. I've given a lot of beginning bird walks, and when I do that, I try not to overwhelm people by taking them to places where they're going to be standing in one place looking at waterfowl. If you're gonna do that, you need to err on the side of spectacle. So if there's a place where there are thousands of ducks, some of which will come closer, that's definitely where you want to start people off. Ideally, people are gonna get the bug and want to kind of do some of the more hardcore stuff, but I would never push newer birders on that. That's kind of a difficult thing. You don't want their first trip to be to the landfill or the sewage treatment plant, or maybe you do. I know the spectacle of gulls there can be pretty impressive depending on which landfill you go to. What do you think? What do you think, Greg?
Is weed legal in Canada?
Yes, I believe it is.
No, I think you hit everything spot on there, Nate. I mean, it just, obviously, if it's, you gotta pay attention to the person you're with, and if they look to be bored, move along.
Yeah.
Find something interesting, and don't be shy about calling it a day if it's not a good day. If you're out there trying to find something and it gets frustrating, although one of the great things about birding is that, and especially with brand new birders, is that there's almost always something to see if you just.
It's true. When I'm leading bird walks, one of the things that I always say to people who have never done it before is that focus on what you do see versus what you don't see. As birders, we're old hands. Sometimes we go out with certain species in mind that we want to see, and if we don't see it, well, that's a little disappointing. But you're birding with people who don't have those hangups, right? They don't know what they're missing, and if you don't draw attention to it, if you make the normal, the ordinary extraordinary, then it's not going to be a big deal. And that's always been sort of what I've done when I've led groups with people that are sort of novices or not serious. You bird differently, and there's nothing wrong with that.
You do, and that's important. You got to remember that it's not about you. It's not about what you're. It's not about what you are. If the day stinks for you, it might not stink for them, and you gotta you gotta remember that, and don't let yourself get frustrated because you're not seeing anything you want to see.
Exactly. Yeah, you gotta manage your expectations. to some extent, which is great. I mean, a bad day birding is better than most other things you could be doing. So it's always something cool. Jaden Bowen asks on Facebook, what is your favorite Warbler song mnemonic? I have one, but I don't know if it's appropriate for Facebook.
Are you thinking of Swainson's Warbler?
No, that's a great one. That's a good one. That's the one I learned from you and actually ended up putting in the field guide to the Birds of the Carolinas I wrote. I was thinking of blue-winged warbler, but yeah, Swainson's Warbler. Ew, ew, I stepped in poo.
Yep.
Also, it's the same beat as the beginning of the Jay Giles band Centerfold. Do 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 do. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Should we go back to some? Yeah. So Ralph Yoder mentions that I take new interested persons to Point Pelee. There's a few places in southern Ontario, a few places in the continent that are as good as Point Pelee to kind of overwhelm people with spectacle, especially on a really great day. And on the other side of the lake is the same thing. Maggie Marsh. So.
Yeah. Wait, what did you say?
Is it McGee or Maggie? I don't know. I always do the wrong one. I always overthink it.
McGee.
Okay,
I say
probably
McGee.
It's probably McGee. I probably did that wrong because I overthought it and then I chose the wrong one. All right, so I got a hawk for you, Greg. This one's from Mission, Texas, way down in the southern part of Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, taken last week. This is a neat bird. I like this bird.
Oh, I love it. And it would be more fun if we didn't know where it was from.
That's true.
Because for a lot of people, when they see this, the first thing is, oh, snail kite. Yeah. And it's not a snail kite. Yeah. But that face pattern is there aren't very many birds that have that face pattern, and this is a young gray hawk.
Young gray hawk, one of my favorite South Arizona too, species.
Yeah,
such a cool bird. Definitely one that has been increasing, it feels like, in South Texas over the last decade and a half. When I first started birding down there when I was just a little kid, that was a super, super good bird. And now it's like every time you go down there, you see at least one.
Yeah.
But they're really cool. And it goes to show the importance of knowing where and when a photo is taken. We always ask that on What's This Bird? It's always one of... It's one of our kind of very important rules when you post a photo on What's This Bird and ask what it is. We definitely want to know where and when. John asks, how do you tell it's not a roadside, Greg? And my answer to that is because it's not, John. Because it's not. They never are. They never are.
Well, it's hard. You'd need, I think... the face pattern looks a little bit bold for roadside, but... Yeah. It's I see what John's saying, and roadside has a streaked chest and a barred belly, and it looks it doesn't you can sort of see the belly there, and I don't see any barring. It just looks like that streaking goes all the way down.
Yeah. All right, so I got another bird for you. This is one of the classic early spring identification conundrums. And What's This Bird? The bird that we see show up so often, over and over and over again in the group. People say, "What is this dark, streaky bird at my feeder? Is it a sparrow?" But it is not a sparrow, friend.
Is it a dessert topping?
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's a female red-winged blackbird, of course.
Female red-winged blackbird, yeah. So,
and it is one of the most confusing birds for new birders.
Yeah, it does look like a sparrow, but shape is different. Look, you're looking at a bird that has a very long body, relatively short tail, relatively long beak. It's like if someone took a sparrow and like stretched it out laterally.
Right, and that's something that's interesting too. Is that on a male red-winged blackbird, you don't pay attention to those things. It's a blackbird with red epaulets.
So one of the great names for birds on the North American continent. Very, very easy.
Yeah, and that's what you pay attention to. And when you see the female is the exact same shape and structure and everything else. And suddenly it's like, brr.
Yeah.
You're paying attention to pattern and you're not paying attention to structure, just as you were not paying attention to structure in the male.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have any questions about bird identification or birding in general, please let us know in the comments or add us on Twitter. We are happy to take those questions and answer them as we go. There's nothing Greg and I like more than talking about birds, so we'll do it. We'll do it till the heat death of the universe. So Noah Cuck has a question. Thoughts on habitat loss from oil and agricultural practices throughout the Midwest? Sucks. That's all I got.
There's a deep well.
Yeah, right.
I don't know what to say to that other than, things have to change, and right now. Anyways, there's not a lot to say.
I mean, I think that in the upper Midwest, there's a long history of sort of public and private partnerships, people working together to protect habitat through conservation easements and whatnot. But, those are, people use those when it's advantageous for them to do so through their taxes or through subsidies or whatever. And when it's no longer that, then they will stop and they'll plow it and they'll put soybeans there because you got to have something. So, vote for people who support conservation easements and all sorts of good stuff like that. And hopefully we can get there before it's not too late. Birds are resilient, as we always like to say here. And when they have the opportunity to recover, they tend to do that pretty well. You just have to give them the opportunity.
And, pretty much all non-human animals and systems do. I've been watching the remarkable recovery or change in the channels in Venice, and the fish and dolphins are appearing in the channels for the first time in 60 years because it's suddenly clean. I mean, it's remarkable how quickly that stuff can change. And Nicholas Gonzalez, staffer from Audubon, noted on Twitter, what is this self-isolating behavior that we're sort of forced to do? I mean, what does it have to do for beach nesting birds when people are no longer on the beach or driving on the beach? It could potentially be a boom year for those birds. And sure,
that would be great. That would be a great thing to see. A silver lining in this kind of frustrating cloud that we are all living through right now.
Yeah.
Tristan Jobin asked another really excellent question. Thank you, Tristan, for keeping us going. Any pointers for hawk ID when you have a quick flyover? First reflex besides size, wing shape, tail, etc. That's a great question, and I would take issue with one thing, size, because I don't think that when you are looking at a hawk flying over, you're necessarily paying attention to size as much as you think you are. I think that's sort of shorthand for like proportion that you're looking at, because I think that all the different raptors sort of have slightly different shapes, and they may feel bigger or feel smaller based on what you see. And I think that when we say size, that's sort of what we're talking about. For instance, when I see a broad-winged hawk fly over, I'm seeing a bird with kind of a real chunky body, relatively short, paddly wings, as opposed to, say, a red-shouldered hawk, which is much lankier with sort of longer tail and kind of more square-shaped wings. So I'm not really thinking of size so much as like how the parts of the bird sort of arrange themselves in comparison with the other parts. And it's not something, when you've been birding a long time and you see a lot of hawks, you can talk to any hawk watcher. It's like, their synapses are firing on that stuff so fast that it feels like it's a completely different language. But it's something that you can practice and learn. You just got to look at a lot of hawks.
Well, it takes repetition and it takes familiarity, as you're saying. I long time ago I read a great analogy of somebody who a person very, very well, and you can look down a crowded street blocks away, and in a crowd of people walking towards you, you can pick out your sister instantly
Yeah.
by the way she walks, and just, whatever it is, you can just instantly pick that person out
Mm-hmm.
because you're so familiar with them.
Right.
And you can't explain exactly why, but you just can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's little things, like you were saying, like you learn, red-shouldered hawks tend to, when they're soaring, look like their fingertips are reaching forward a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a matter of repetition and familiarity.
Yeah, and Carl Bendorf in the comments makes a good point. Perception of size can also be sort of shorthand for behavior as well. Like some birds'
Absolutely.
behavior, like Cooper's hawk and sharp-shinned hawk. I think of Cooper's having kind of choppy wing beats, right? So they look almost a little labored when they're flying, whereas sharp-shinned has like real quick, snappy wing beats when they're flying by.
They flicker.
They flicker, yeah.
They
exactly.
flicker.
Yeah.
Their wing beats flicker. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And as we say, repetition. Get out there and look at some hawks, and you'll start seeing it too. The longer you do it, and a lot of times that stuff happens without you even really recognizing that it's happening. It's just like one day down the road, you see a relatively distant raptor, and you're able to pin it to, maybe species, maybe something less specific, but you're able to pin it faster than you would have expected, and it's like learning a language, right? So it's the language of bird identification that. Or like learning a musical instrument or whatever. Someone who can, play jazz, can improvise on anything without really thinking. Like their brain goes straight into the instrument. Well, a great birder can do the same thing with their brain going straight to identifying that bird.
Yeah, and one thing to remember, birding has kind of transmogrified a little bit, not a little bit, a lot. Maybe almost entirely, into people taking photographs of birds and then identifying them after the fact, which is cool. Yeah, right. But one thing to remember when you're doing that is that birds can change the shape of their wings as they need to or want to.
Yeah.
And I've got thousands of pictures of hawks taken at hawk watches. And if I had the ability right now to pop them up on the screen, I could show you pictures of sharp-shinned hawks that look like a sharp-shinned hawk or a merlin or anything in between.
Yeah, I always think of things like, rock pigeon is kind of the classic bird that can look like any other bird, depending on what it's doing. I can't tell you, the rock pigeons have fooled me when you get that quick glimpse. And you're like, oh, it's a falcon. Oh, it's a Jaeger. Oh, it's a whatever.
Well, you're not,
like rock pigeon.
you're used to seeing them walking around in the park, and you don't realize that when they're powerful flyers.
Yeah, they really are. They can really move. You realize why things like pigeons have spread all over the South Pacific and evolved into myriad different versions of this common theme, because their ancestors were essentially like these kind of rock pigeon like birds that could fly forever without stopping.
Yeah.
All right, I got one more image for you.
Okay.
Here you go. This was from March 19th, so yesterday. It was from upstate New York. This is another bird that people shows up at their feeder. Yeah.
I'm going to catch some flack for this one. This is one of my favorite birds.
It's not such a bad...
And
a lot of people have a lot of bad things to say about European starlings. But they are interesting.
Which is what this is.
Yeah, which is European starling. In the sense that this bird is molting. It's doing that cool thing where starlings do. So starlings molt once a year, right? It's sort of molting.
Well,
it's
and
wearing.
And actually, I would say it's molted, and you're right. It's one of those birds that molts once a year, and in the fresh plumage, every feather has that buffy white tip on it. Mm-hmm. And during the course of the year, they wear off, so that when the bird reaches May and they're glossy black all over, that's breeding plumage, but it's actually the same plumage, just with all the white buffy tips worn off.
Right, and so you can see this bird here, especially around... Yeah, you can see it, especially around the head of this bird.
Right.
Yeah, that's starting
the
to wear
chest,
off.
The neck, the side of the neck.
Yeah, so it's in this kind of transition plumage, which a lot of field guides don't show. I mean, they'll show one or the other, but so it's right in the middle of it, so it can be kind of confusing. But
they are as... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that big, thick body, the pot belly, the thick yellow bill, the long wings, and the short tail. All that is the same year round for European starling.
Yeah, and this is what our dear
And
friend Tony Fitzpatrick calls little wing gangsters, and they get a bad rap, but they're just extremely successful. And yes, they are aggressive, um, and they're powerful flyers. Also, they move and can go anywhere and do whatever they want,
yeah,
and take over almost any ecosystem they want. Sounds kind of like another animal that we're familiar with.
yeah, a little too close, a little too close.
Yeah.
And Kayla Prato says she loves their mimicry, which is, a great point,
Yes.
especially this time of year when people are antsy for the first singing birds. European starling can sound like a lot of them. Anything with like a
Yeah.
whistle, it's gonna imitate that.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is I spend a lot of time backyard birding in an extremely urban setting
Mm-hmm.
where I live on the west side of Chicago, and the starlings and the house sparrows, but in particular the starlings, have different alarm calls for different threats.
Huh.
So when there is a cat in the yard, they will come down and they have this very harsh, loud growl. And they'll sit up there in the trees and just and growl at it, and they'll mob it. But if a Cooper's hawk flies through, it's this very loud, snappy, like chatter that I'm not going to try to imitate, but it's a very loud, metallic noise, and they scatter, and everything else scatters. So when the starlings are growling at something, all the other birds come in to see what it is, and
Yeah.
when they do that loud metallic alarm call, everything scatters and hits the dirt.
Huh. Oh, that's wild. Yeah, so they can essentially understand starling language. So
Exactly.
they can. So I know a lot of birds have to do that for chickadees as well. Chickadees are kind of the classic alarm birds, and across most of the continent, and they have different calls based on different where the threat is coming from, be it a land or air threat, and other animals can understand it. Well, it makes evolutionary sense for them to do so.
Yeah.
Ralph Yoder has another question on Facebook. He asks, he's in Michigan. He has a dead spruce next to his window, has woodpeckers. He wants to know, when is the best and worst time to remove it. I assume that there's some sort of safety reason behind needing to remove it. Otherwise, I would just say just leave it up. But I understand you got to move trees sometimes. And best
Well,
time.
and let's back up on that just a little bit. I've got some friends in the suburbs that had similar situation with a dead tree in their yard, and the woodpeckers were really loving it, but it was a threat to their back porch.
Mm-hmm.
So they cut it back to the point where it was no longer a threat to the porch, but left the main trunk and a couple of big limbs standing, and cut a couple holes and drilled a couple holes in it too, and they've got woodpeckers all over the place, and they're trying to attract a screech owl.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's not everybody wants to have a dead tree in their yard, especially in their front yard. I get it, but if you've got if you can leave it up, you might be surprised what things you'll see, because dead trees attract a lot of stuff.
If you have to take it down, when would you do it? I'm not an arborist, so I don't really know, but I would say not when they're breeding. Maybe before.
If there's nothing nesting in it,
Yeah,
if there's nothing
anytime,
nesting in it, then anytime. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Ralph Yoder says no carpenter ants are welcome. Well, yeah, that could be a problem. I'm dealing with some ants right here on my desk that came in.
Yeah, that's the carpenter ants are what attract woodpeckers.
Yeah,
And,
especially the big ones.
Yep.
Yeah, if you've got any other questions about birds or birding, please let us know in the comments. We're happy to take them. I've gone through all my Cliff Hawley says fall after nesting. That's sort of my gut reaction as well. Yeah. Or before they're nesting. Tristan Jobin asks, Tristan, killing it with the great questions today. Can you summarize the northwestern American crow situation as to why it will be lumped? Why was it two species in the first place? Whew, I guess that's... All right, so I'll do my best. And keep in mind that I am not a scientist by any means, and I only sort of glanced over the recent AOS proposal and read a couple general science articles about it. But I'm not exactly sure why it was two species in the first place. I think my sense is that at the time when this bird northwestern crow was first described, the separation was a lot more obvious, right? So the northwestern crow was primarily a coastal species, and American crows, I guess, didn't interact with them too much. And my sense is that in the last couple hundred years, based on, I mean, I don't know, development, would you suspect that that's part of the case, Greg? I mean, that's why the barred owls are coming into the spotted owl habitat at the same time.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah, I guess that they were never that separate. They're never that separate to begin with. When I interviewed Nick Block on the American Birding Podcast, we were talking about, like, where do you draw the line for what is a full species and what isn't, and the differences between the biological species concept and the phylogenetic species concept. It's phylogenetic, right? I get that right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's the difference between, like, when you're driving on a highway, the difference between seeing the sign telling you that the road is going to split and the actual split. And my sense is that northwestern crow never quite made it to that full split, so that when American crows started coming back in the last, 200-300 years, they began pretty regularly breeding with each other again. And it suggests that they're maybe not full species. That's sort of my interpretation of it. But the birds around the Puget Sound area in western Washington and southwestern British Columbia are pretty... I mean, it's a pretty mix. I mean, it's a hybrid swarm for the most part. That's my interpretation. Feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. Cliff Hawley asks about the new saw-whet owl, the Haida Gwaii saw-whet owl in British Columbia, off the coast of British Columbia. How do people get to that island chain? I have no idea. I've never looked into it, but
that's about to be one of the
seaplane. It's mostly national parks, right? It's mostly a national park, I think, the Big Island at least.
Yeah, and that is going to be one of the hottest birding destinations.
Could be.
Once we're clear and allowed to go travel around, people wanting to go out there and see that owl is going to be something.
It'll be interesting, and from what just looking at Haida Gwaii in general. That's a pretty amazing island chain, what were formerly called the Queen Charlotte Islands. They were changed to Haida Gwaii in the about 11 years ago. And they're further out from the coast than a lot of the other kind of barrier islands in that part of the world. And so they are more isolated. And so they have things like this endemic subspecies, perhaps even full species of saw-whet owl that forages frequently in tidal ponds, which is kind of amazing. But there are other endemics as well. So there's like an endemic subspecies of black bear and an endemic subspecies of short-tailed weasel or long-tailed weasel, and an endemic, one of the squirrels is endemic there too. And I think there's another bird, but I can't recall offhand what it is. It'll be interesting. It's sort of fascinating. That's, so Greg Brinkley says, wow, a saw-whet owl split. Well, if you are like the kind of person that peruses their field guides, you may have noticed for a long time in the saw-whet owl section, there's usually been like a little illustration of a very dark saw-whet owl, and they say like, British Columbia subspecies, whatever. But it's this endemic subspecies Brooksy, of northern saw-whet owl that's darker and I
don't know if see if Sibley has it in version 2. I'm not certain if he does.
Yeah, it's neat. Oh, Ralph Yoder asks how to keep carpenter ants in the dead spruce and away from his wooden structure house. Well, I can't help you there.
Yes, he does.
I don't know. Yeah, I knew Sibley had the Haida Gwaii saw-whet owl. And if you look for photos on eBird for Haida Gwaii saw-whet owl, none of them are entered as that subspecies. But if you look for photos that were taken just on that island, then you can find some photos. Yeah, it looks like a saw-whet owl, except it's darker. It looks like the unspotted saw-whet owl of
Correct.
Central America, of Middle America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we've been doing this for about an hour now, so I think, Greg, let's about wrap it up. If no one else has any other questions about birds or bird identification or birding, otherwise, we will try and do this regularly. I know a lot of us are kind of home and stuck and not going anywhere, but still have this need to kind of talk about birds or talk with people about birds. And ABA, we are here to do that. And Caleb Prato says do it again. We'll do it again. We've been doing these far too infrequently, and I think we're gonna do this, and we've got some other things planned that hopefully will keep everybody interested in about birds. Cliff asked about scrub jays. Do you have an opinion about scrub jays?
I love scrub jays.
Yeah, but
that's my
the
opinion
name change. Did you know?
I know. I know.
All right. I don't know how many people read these AOS things.
All right. So here's the thing. Here's the thing about that. I don't have a problem with making the name shorter at all. And if we wind up with Florida jay, California jay, Woodhouse's jay, and Island jay, that doesn't bother me at all. I've seen some people say that, okay, well, if they take the scrub out of the Florida scrub jay name, then suddenly the scrub habitat that's endangered in Florida loses its importance. I don't agree with that at all. But in the same proposal, we have, let's shorten the name of scrub jays, and let's call this new owl the Haida-Gwaii saw-whet owl.
What is the banding code for Haida-Gwaii saw-whet owl?
Yeah.
Let's
just call it Haida-Gwaii owl, and leave the saw-whet part Haida-Gwaii owl, and leave the saw-whet part out of it, and be done with that, and that'll be good, and that'll point to the importance of it being endemic.
Yeah. And then California gets an endemic too, an island jay.
Yeah,
Santa Cruz jay, which I like better. I'll be honest, Santa Cruz jay is better.
So one thing that we've got this, and I'm going to have to switch off here. We have a special membership thing.
Yeah.
That let's see here.
To get that set up.
I have lost, because our stream has gotten so big in Slack. I have lost the code.
I was thinking that too.
Let's see here. See if I can get David up.
Hey, David Hartley, you there? If you are, drop that code in the comments as the ABA account. But Cliff Hawley says he wants California jay so bad. I mean, like, California's got enough birds named after him. They got a quail, and what's they got? California thrasher. They got a towhee. Now they get a jay too. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So it's if you go to aba.org/join and use WTB15 as the discount code, you will get $15 off your membership, your new membership.
Did you hear that? That's very exciting. And people who are already members can use it to renew.
Absolutely.
Because I don't know if you know, but there's kind of a crisis going on right now about corvids. And so now would be a great time to join or renew if you want to help us out here at the ABA.
We'll put that in the comments. We'll put that in the comments both on Twitter here and in What's This Bird. But it is WTB for What's This Bird 15. And I'm going to do that right now. Yep.
I'm gonna put it on
And
the. I'm gonna put it right there in front of us too, Greg. If I gotta do this editing here real quick, I'm gonna change my name to WTB15, and that is the code for helping us out. It doesn't count for students too. That's a good question, Martina, and you will have to 50% off for students. John says. There you go. It does count. What a deal! What a deal! Clifford Hawley asks, "Are there any word on the status of the ABA youth camps?" We are not making decisions on our travel and camp things right now. We're doing it on a case-by-case basis, but we will definitely let the people know who are involved when we make those decisions, or whether those decisions are effectively made for us. So keep posted. We definitely want to keep those opportunities alive until they absolutely.
Big stuff coming on the ABA website, so stay tuned.
Water cooler, I guess. Adios.
Alrighty.
Bye, guys.
Bye.